The following program was made possible thanks to the generous support of our Kickstarter backers.
Well, first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired.
Sup, Holmes?
Beware your host, Jonathan Holmes.
It's me. Ugh, an uglier version. What the crap is this? Totally failed on the technical front, which is so embarrassing. With you, Chad and Jared, developers of Cuphead, you guys are like the talk of the town, the cream of the crop, the A1 sauce of the video game development world right now, and you're looking at me like this. I feel terrible about myself. I'm so sorry. How are you?
We're doing one.
I was thinking if I weren't so distracted by self-consciousness, I would have said, I've got Michael Fassbender and his brother Jared on the show, because geez, Chad, you look like a freaking movie star.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I have a mask on.
That's a mask. That's a Scooby-Doo style villain mask you're wearing right now. Look at that little Spider-Man.
Yeah. It's an office/child's bedroom.
There's a little car there, too. And what's that poster? Titled The Sega Adventure?
Yeah, I threw up one Master System poster to kind of make it feel like it's still my office. The rest is child's art and then his stickers.
It's kind of nice. The generations coming together. You are brothers. You are Chad and Jared Moldenhauer. Is that how I pronounce it?
Perfectly.
Yep. Awesome. Whew. And you are making Cuphead.
Yes,
which
indeed.
kind of blew everyone's mind that I've ever met, anyway. I remember E3 was happening. We got an email from Destructoid founder and owner Nero Gonzalez just saying, it's all about Cuphead, guys. And we were like, what? And then that's all he cared about. He was like, E3, it's basically the Cuphead show. It's all he cared about. How has it been for you guys to suddenly have your game be on the map the way that it is and people are talking about it the way that they are?
Totally unexpected. We thought there would be a small group of people that would enjoy the game and enjoy the visuals, just because growing up, even with our peers and friends talking about 1930s cartoons, everybody always gave a, yeah, they're cool, but, you know, whatever. So we thought that it would be the same amount of people that would enjoy the visuals and the idea that this game's going, but it's been amazing. So we're both just blown out of the water with the response. And don't know what to say, really. Lots of words, I think.
Has it put a lot of pressure on you to...
Yes.
Yeah, because I would imagine that you know that they actually haven't played the game. So they have an idea of what they want, but who knows if that idea is actually going to match what you're going to deliver. I can only imagine what it would be like if, let's say, I did some drawings and they looked really good, but people couldn't help but concoct an idea of what they wanted from that. I would be terrified of what I would make after that. Has it been scary?
Well, we kind of have like the vision for the game, so it's not like it can change. It's just that we haven't shared so much. It's been very small clips, which is also why we're shocked that people are like talking about it like it's the next Zelda, even though they've only seen a total of like 45 seconds. But we're just hoping soon enough we'll get more done and set up a new trailer where you can see more thoroughly the gameplay and lots of little features on the next trailer. So then people's imagination will kind of have to follow what our vision is. It won't be as interpretive at that point.
Sure. I'm guessing that people, the way they've talked about it anyway, they're already married to the game. They're not going to give up on it even if it doesn't look exactly like what they want. What do you attribute the way that it took off in the larger consciousness of video game culture? Why do you think people ended up talking about it and wanting people to know that that's something that they cared about? Like people pridefully saying, all I care about is Cuphead, guys. Those other games, E3, don't even talk to me about that Cuphead. Why do you think it was? What do you think it is about Cuphead that clicked with people that way?
I think it has to, the 90% of that has to be the visuals, because we haven't showed much gameplay off. So anybody who says this game, the gameplay looks amazing, and that's why I love Cuphead, is kind of fooling themselves from what we've showed on the internet and such. But there hasn't been an actual, to our knowledge, a hand-drawn game that has no digital elements in it. So I think that's probably a big draw, and the fact that there hasn't been too many games that have tried to outright mimic a cartoon style. And not just the 30s cartoons, but cartoons in general. We were almost going for what Dragon's Lair was back in the day, except a fully playable game. So I think that's my interpretation of why people are enjoying it.
Yeah, and I just realized there may be some people that don't know what Cuphead is. What would you explain Cuphead to be for people who haven't heard of it yet?
It is a run-and-gun game, which follows in the same vein as Gunstar Heroes or Contra 3, which are some of our favorite run-and-guns. And it's set in a 1930s cartoon universe with, folly sound, and actual jazz recordings and big bands. So just kind of like a cartoon experience of a slightly modern game, as in 1990s modern.
Sure. What inspired you to create something like this? Like you said, never been done before. Untested waters, looking extremely expensive. Like when I heard it was a relatively small studio creating this thing that looks like top of the line 1930s animation, very very beautiful artwork, not cheap to do all those individual frame by frame animations. What? Why are you doing this?
Stupidity.
Well, it's certainly working. It's something that other people wouldn't have taken the risk on, but something drove you to do it. What do you think it was?
Well, I mean, like, we've always had the feeling, like, all old games kind of imitated certain mediums. Like a Final Fantasy VI sort of looks more painted than, let's say, Dragon Warrior. So, in our heads, when you're younger, you use your imagination to sort of fill in the rest of it. So, like, you kind of always imagined it was more of a cartoon, or there was more animation than possible. Then as we got older, we realized, like, why hasn't anybody yet done a fully animated game? And, like, we weren't initially even going to go with that. We were going to go with, like, a different kind of textured look and, like, played with so many ideas. But then it turns out Chad's naturally an amazing animator. And after the first test, we were just like, yes, that's gold. That will be a beautiful style.
And I think Jared also, as a joke, when we started doing styles, I would test a couple very rudimentary graphic styles for the game, and he would joke, it'd be awesome if we could just put 30s cartoons in. So we kind of played with that idea as just a grasp for the stars laugh, just for our own fun. But when we saw what it looked like, it was just an instant, like, maybe we should kill ourselves and go down this route.
And Chad, are you doing the bulk of the work on the animation?
Yes, we have another guy out of New York called Smo, and he is doing a lot of animation too, but currently I'm handling all the design for the game and a big chunk, I would say 70% of the animation.
Whoa! So how many different characters do you think you're going to have in the game?
What are we shooting for again? Jared knows.
Ugh, somewhere around like 20.
And then if you take into account other, non-playable characters and this and that, probably 25, 30, something like that.
What? I actually went to art school for undergraduate, so I know a little bit about hand-drawn animation. I used to try to do it. Back when, like you, I loved Contra, Gunstar Heroes, and then moving into fighting games, I thought they were all just hand-drawn, and somebody just drew Sakura and then scanned it in and just turned it into video game graphics. And of course, I found out that there's a lot more to it. They had to go in and then add sprite artwork and blah, blah, blah. The drawings were just kind of a guide for the most part. But to actually do finished, like one finished Cuphead drawing would take me like an entire day. And you are doing like the frames per animation. One of the things I love about 1930s animation is they didn't know yet that they could get away with like skimping on how smooth the animation was.
Yes.
They hadn't tested that water yet, so they were like, this has to be. I mean, the way this works is 1 frame per second, so it has to match live action perfectly. So it's so smooth back then, and you're doing that.
Yes, and like that. I mean, it's a problem, but it's an amazing thing because I'll plan out animation out for one of the characters or the bosses, and I'll be in my mind. I'm like, this is about 20, 25 frames. That's awesome. And in the end, it takes 50 or 60 frames. So.
Yeah, that is so many. How many? If you had to guess how many frames of animation you've drawn so far, what would your guess be?
It's in the thousands already. So. It's
Really?
there's gonna be a lot. Like, I think there probably should be close to, I mean, depending on how much we can make Smo put out, which should be a ton, but probably close to 3,000 frames in the end. That's just a guess for everything. Because even effects take up a lot, too. And they're not as difficult to draw, but if you're doing explosions or, background effects, there's, 60 frames just taking a blink. Like the fire in the background of the bat stage is about 45 frames, just for the one single set of the flames coming up and down. Yeah, it makes me cry just thinking about it too.
How has your life been? How is your life going?
Kind of like a only work. So, and I'm just slowly transitioning out of my other job, so it's been non-stop work and doing nothing else. Which, I mean, we love what we're doing, so I'm not gonna complain. My hand hurts once in a while, my neck kind of bugs me, but just keep going.
Yeah. That's the way you have to be. I think that's what. There are two things in my experience that separate people who can make a job of animation and the people who can't. The ability to get into that mode where 8 hours go by and you're still in it. You haven't gotten sick of it for whatever reason. You're still embracing it. I think I read a book by Seamus Cullinane, I believe his name was. He did animation on like Snow White and stuff like that. And he described getting in a flow state where he would just like draw 1 foot and like move just that foot and like not even think about it. Before he knew it, he'd done like 20 frames. So that was my hero, being able to do that. So you have to be able to get in there, and you have to be able to tolerate animating stuff that you really don't care about that much. Like, if you think, oh, I only want to draw Goku shooting a Kamehameha wave, I want that to be my job, then you'll never make it in the industry. You have to be willing to just like animate the chair. Move
Yeah,
in. Be like, yeah, that was my day, guys. The chair. It was worth it. And it sounds like you've got that, Chad. I envy that.
I mean, the other crazy thing is, I think that makes it even a bit more challenging is I'm doing all my own in-betweens. So even back in the 30s, you'd have people, doing most of the keyframes, and the assistant animators would come in and add the rest. But this is just like a do them all, and then ink them all. So.
Yeah. What were you doing before the Cuphead project started?
I was running a small marketing company, so design and websites, that kind of a thing, some online work. So I think it helped a lot to have a strong design background, at least for graphic design, to port over to gaming. But as for animating, I hadn't touched 2D animation in my entire life until we started this.
What?
No, blew my mind too.
So this is the first 2D animation job you've done?
Yes. This is my first attempt at 2D animation. It seems to be working out okay.
What is that like? That's a little bit like if we were watching the Olympics and a guy just did a double Indy or whatever they do in that Rodney Dangerfield movie, and you're like, oh my god. And you're like, this is the first time I dove. Guys. Whatever. I'm doing my best. No, that's not fair. How do you even... All right, my Chad jealousy is going through the roof. I need to tone it down and focus on Jared a little bit. Jared, what is
Well,
your role in the development of Cuphead? And what got you mentioned Chad's animation is part of what got you started in wanting to really push it. But before that, before you knew it was going to look this good, what motivated you to want to make Cuphead?
well, I mean, like, we always had this idea of making a game. So this has kind of been like a long-running thing between the two of us for I don't know how long, 18, 20 years. But I mean, obviously, at some of those we weren't producing something. So it started probably, I don't even remember what that would be. Chad, help, grade 12 after?
Yeah, 2000, 2001, somewhere around there.
Okay. So in 2001, we had an idea for a different game, but there was no like real indie scene. But we were still like making little design docs and like trying to come up with how the game's gonna play, pre-setting up like World 1, 2, and 3. And we reached like a point where the game looked interesting, and we had just the bare bones, like a very beta version of like a first level. And then it was just so tough to get around, like so tough to have anybody willing to talk to you from any company to see if you could keep this going. And then also considering that you're like barely out of high school, you didn't have any money to really fund it. So it was kind of just like time passed, and then all of a sudden the indie scene's huge. And we're like, it brought out of us the feeling again to be like, you know what? Now is the perfect time. Let's actually complete a game. We have the money. We're older. We're settled. We have a lot of great ideas. Let's put it together and get it done. So it was kind of, I don't know if it was right after Super Meat Boy, but it would be near that era when we decided we're for surely making a game. And then we can remortgage our houses and then hopefully don't end up living in an alley when we're done.
Yeah.
And see how that treats us.
Wow. The developers of Shovel Knight Yacht Club games recently showed, and it's pretty rare for a developer to do this, showed exactly how much everything cost to make their game. And I'm pretty sure Shovel Knight cost over $1 million to make for to see the Sean Velasco's lead designer. There was a production artist, a couple of animators, music, but still it was $1 million for basically what similar production values as a NES game. And they did that intentionally, in part because they were like, well, animation is really expensive, and NES animation, even though you need to be good in order to do it, if you're talented, you can do stuff that looks really nice with minimal amount of work. You know, each character maybe would have 3 or 4 frames in their run animation, not 45 frames for the fire that's in the background. How much? It's just breaking the bank for you guys to fund this. I would imagine it couldn't be cheap.
It's not necessarily breaking the bank if you're doing a large portion of it. Like you're funding it through going to work, and it's not like somebody's paying Chad to animate. He just has to suffer through it.
Exactly. You just do stuff for free, and then technically it would cost tons of money if we had to hire animators to speed this up. If we said, hey, let's go hire 3 animators who still do traditional animation, which is almost impossible these days, then we'd be talking into the $1 million range if we wanted to finish this. But I'm just going to kind of, eat the cheapest food I can and continue animating, and Smo is going to help and do a ton of stuff, and we'll get it done.
Right. So it's a trade-off between money and potential stress and suffering, but you also get to take pride in knowing you're like the chief animator on this beautiful-looking game that's doing something that's never done before, and you have total control as well, I hope anyway, over exactly how the art turns out. And had either of you worked on games before in any capacity?
None. Like no background of being, working at a game company or even testing games. None of that.
Nothing at all. And Jared either. Nothing.
Nope.
I don't know if it could be because my speakers are, believe it or not, I'm having technical problems and my speakers are a little bit crappy, but I don't know if I heard, Jared, what you are doing on Cuphead and what you have done in the past in this kind of vein.
He tried to skip that question.
Lead design. Like, I basically am putting the game together. I am deciding on what the patterns, how the game's going to be played, what the types of weapons, and balancing the whole thing. I'm also playtesting it and trying to learn how to be a Foley artist, even though I hope I have Chad's animation skills where I can go from zero practice before to the best Foley artist in the world, but just do studying and pull through. And I mean, like, lots of it just comes from way too many years of playing games, so there's already just, like, we seem to have dissected them a little bit more, like, put more effort into understanding, like, why they played and why the camera moved and how the hitboxes are actually working. So with that basis, we seem to be able to make a strong game. Like, it plays as good as any of the other 16-bit games that were of our favorite. Definitely not some of the weaker ones where I can't understand how a company would have no clue how a camera works. Whoa. Which is like half of Super NES games.
Would you feel badly naming a run-gun SNES game that you thought just didn't have the design chops to make it worth playing?
Well, I mean, what the hell is that?
Oh, I know what you're
The
thinking of
Jim
too.
Powers in the 3D. I was trying to think of the other one, the guy whose hitbox swings like well outside of himself. He's like
Really?
almost looks like a little elf with blonde hair, but I can't name that game. But
Yeah.
Jim Powers in the 3D universe, like the Contra 3 ripoff, where it has the overhead levels 2 after each, and like an insane dizzying parallax, which is actually kind of nice. But it just feels rough. Like, you can tell that the level designers were like, this is Contra because we put an enemy on the screen and your guy moves and shoots. And you're like, that's all true. But in the end, like, you'll never go back and play Jim Powers. Sorry to all the Jim Powers fans.
Yes.
So what do you think what do you have to provide for the player in terms of pacing, enemy placement, that sort of thing, in order to give them a dynamic experience that doesn't feel like I'm just walking and shooting and that it's like Contra because there is an enemy there? How do you do the opposite of that?
Well, it's just like being able to understand the pacing that you're looking for. So like a game like a Jim's Powers or any of the clones, they never seem to build the momentum. They'll just have a part where like the floor keeps going up and down, and it's not fun to traverse that. It's not even part of that game. It's not really of a use. But if you have like a good eye, it's about knowing that, let's say, the place you put a sniper should interact with you on that exact screen. So the platform should be based on what two attacks you know are happening, and then always keep multiple options. Like, never design it so that you're like, you entered this room and there's only one way to get past this. It should always, scene by scene, almost understand what's happening. Whereas a lot of games and like a lot of like TurboGrafx and things like that, you can tell that during that time they were like, harder would be more interesting, so we put 5 guys on the screen with a gun. But when you play it, it's not like you intuitively come to that scene and then you kind of dodge it. You just learn to like either scroll the screen slowly or like the exact placement of the only place that they will all miss you. And it's like those kind of aspects in game design were overlooked by some of the copycat studios. So I think once you understand like each layout, like for our bosses per se, like sometimes it's in your head you have a perfect image and you swear this pattern's going to work out, but it's only until you play it that you realize there's like a few empty zones that involve the player not moving or not interacting. And then you do have to add like one subtle detail. Like if you look at Contra 3, some of the bosses, you can tell they were like, this is pretty static, add a P-shot. It would be like Beast Kimco coming out of the wall. If you take away that P-shot, you're not actually doing much. And I'm like, it's that little touch, that extra thought that kind of separates it from being a mundane to like completely being involved in what the programmers or designers have wanted for that scene. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I was leaning in deep. That's how you know I'm like, yeah, this is good stuff.
I think
Do it without thinking about it. Can you think of some? I'd want to hear about games that influenced you, if there were any games that influenced on the art side and also on the design side, games that after you played them you thought, that's the kind of thing that I want to bring into the world if possible. You mentioned Contra 3, Gunstar Heroes, sounds like Treasure. I think Treasure, before they became Treasure, worked on Contra 3. I think so.
supposedly, yes.
Yeah? Are there games, Chad, that influenced you on the art side, or was it strictly just animation from the 30s?
Well, I think the idea of putting this kind of animation in a game was influenced by things like Mickey Mania, or even Pinocchio that came out later, I'm pretty sure, on Genesis and Super NES. And even, I guess, Shiny's Aladdin had, well, they worked with Virgin at the time, but David Perry's team did quite a bit of effort to make that look as animated as it could be for that time. So those kind of games, and seeing any other 2D games that had a ton of animation, like Street Fighter 3, always blew our minds. And we appreciate 3D art too, and it's amazing, but deep down, 2D is our love, so any really well-done 2D games kind of put the influence on us to put as much animation as we could possibly fit into this game.
Mm-hmm.
And then
it sounds like it not only inspired you, but you set the bar that you want to exceed. You want to not just meet the standard that's been set before. You want to expand and go beyond what they've done.
Yes, or like hopefully go beyond. Like reach for it. Nobody's saying we're going to get beyond, but
right. But to aim high and then
aim
even
high.
hit. Yeah, that makes sense. And for you, Jared, are there games, modern games, that inspired you to think that this kind of run and gun, very pacing focused, detail focused, adding little nuances to make sure that the action never gets stale? Were there other games doing that succeeded that made you think, oh, there's a place for this? Or did you just think, screw it, I'm doing it, whether there's a place for it or not, because you wanted to get it made?
No, there was definitely like any of the classics that we like. I mean, it could be as simple as every Mega Man game. There's something to the charm of the way all the bosses are designed. There's something nice about the feeling. They're more like AI based, and you can kind of trap them, or proximity based, so you can make them redo something. But if you just play them as they were initially set up to play, it's just like a very interesting matchup. And then if you jump to a game like Adventures of Batman and Robin on Genesis, it was just nice to see some of the level design goes a little long, but the boss design, I loved that it just kept adding. It would be like starting with 1 or 2 patterns, and then at 20% health, it's like now has like 6 patterns, and then it's onto something new, and you're like, that was just a middle boss, had changed more than most games ever did with their final boss of the game. And I was like, I love that notion, and like I love some of the bigger fights. That I was like, what if we made a game that was full of that? That was constantly feeling like the biggest boss you've played. Not necessarily physically biggest boss, but just like pattern-wise.
Right.
And that does not mean that everything's going to change 500 times. Don't hold it to us. Because, like, to animate a boss changing 1,000 times and changing his hat and putting a new pair of pants on, it'd be like animating a brand new cartoon.
we should do that. Let's do it.
Yeah, actually, right now.
And this is where we're saying we're going to do a boss that changes 2,000 times, because it's easy for us to do, so we'll do it.
Well, I'd imagine that you can make the pattern change without hopefully having to generate too much additional art, and showing the player that you thought and cared enough about this game that you devised ways to advance a theme, to have the boss have one theme in terms of how it attacks, but then do variations on that theme and continue to give you that feeling of, wow, I don't know exactly what to expect. It gets me pretty excited already, and bringing it back to what we were talking about before as to why people are excited about Cuphead. My guess is it's because, first of all, it defies marketability as we know it in the video game industry today. AAA gaming going on realism and HD pockmark graphics and, you know, all new particle effects and faders, just tossing all that out and being like, nope, 1930s animation. It's the kind of breath of fresh air people didn't know they wanted, and that's the trick, it seems, is to giving people something that they wanted but they didn't know it. If they knew it, they would have just gone and looked for it themselves. But they wanted it the whole time, but not consciously. And then all of a sudden it's shown to them and it just clicks, and they're like blah, drooling, looking at the Cuphead trailer 20 times in a row. It speaks of a genuineness when you take that kind of risk and defy everything that is a sure, or at least on the surface seems like a sure, money-making deal. You're maybe more likely to make even more money. That's my hope. When you do something genuine that isn't just following the mold and it clicks with people, then you become fabulously wealthy. Do you think it's possible? You guys are going to be so rich after Cuphead.
Wow. I think part of the genuineness comes from us wanting, like, we're making the game for us, if that makes any sense.
Oh, sure.
The visual style wasn't let's get a focus group and see if this kind of animation is going to be better than this other style. This is what we loved, and our only hope is there's a small group of people that love this too and will play our game, and that's all we're really shooting for. To make this game, our end goal is just to have made a game. And if that's all we can do is make this one game, that's fine by us. If it gives us, you know, enough income to make more games after this, well then all the better. But there's no, oh, I can't wait to get all this money. I'm so happy that we're making this game because the money's going to come in. We could care less.
And if you did think like that, you probably wouldn't have made Cuphead, and therefore you wouldn't have made a game that people are talking about as much as they are. So interesting, kind of backwards. The less you want the money, the more you'll get. Maybe. Hopefully. I'm hoping. I love it when artists who do it because they love it actually end up getting rewarded for that. Happens every once in a while, thankfully. And the Xbox One, I meant to ask about that. Maybe I don't want to come off stupid, but it's probably too late. Xbox One and PC are all it's announced for right now?
Yes.
Huh. Is that something that you have set in stone, or is there any possibility it's going to branch off into everything? I don't know how you would even put it on everything programming-wise, but is it sticking with those consoles for the foreseeable future, and if so, how come?
Well, I'll answer both your questions.
Great.
The first one, this year we switched to Unity, which was a bit of a setback for us, and that's why we're pushing the date out to next year, because we want that portability for not just one console or one system. So in the future, we're going to launch on Xbox One and PC first, and in the future, we're definitely open to all other platforms. So we're not going to make announcements right now and tell you what's happening, but it's going to be, we'll definitely have an eye open in the future for moving this to other places.
Huh. Have you already been talking to other places?
Lightly, but not tons.
Yeah, that would make sense.
We're not too worried. We want to just focus on Xbox One and PC right now, and then worry about the other stuff later.
Sure, that makes sense. And why Xbox One out of the options that you had?
Well, oddly enough, we put our first trailer up in end of last year, and our hope was, hey, maybe we can get on Steam one day, and that would be awesome. And if we can't, we'll just sell it off of our own site and see what happens. And some of the trailer got around NeoGAF, and some people from Microsoft found the trailer and liked the visual style of the game and contacted us and said, listen, we want this game on Xbox One, please, please. So they approached us, and they're extremely friendly and nice, and we just thought we originally had the game on an XNA framework, you know, thinking, hey, this is going to be PC and Xbox 360. So we already had the idea for a Microsoft release, so it felt like a shoo-in. And I mean, the fact that they're being extremely nice and catering to us is not going to hurt. So that's kind of why we did it.
Yeah, it makes sense. People often talk about Microsoft as being the most hot or cold of the major console houses. James Silva, who's been on the show in the past, he made Charlie Murder and The Dishwasher, really nice hand-drawn looking games actually. Microsoft has treated him extremely well, and it's been great to hear that. And then other people have told me they don't respond to emails, blah blah blah, but they actually went after you. What was that like to know that one of the biggest companies in the world was not only paying attention to your game but actually like seeking you out?
I think that. Go ahead.
Oh,
Hey,
I was just. You think?
It blew our minds. We at that moment we knew that our dream of making a game that a broad selection of people are going to be able to play is coming true. So that's that was almost more exciting than all the attention for people seeing our game, because that was like the starting point of when we knew this was something real and not just two brothers shaking hands in a room. So, yes, that's. I think Jared feels the same way, unless I'm just speaking for him right now.
No, absolutely. It was shocking. It took a long time to be like, Microsoft contacted us. You're like, it could be a prank. It could just be like a friend being like, let's send them an email and make them think that their game's interesting. But like, we also didn't even think of this. It just was the controllers that we had that we were testing with. Our training room happened to be an Xbox controller. So it just seemed perfectly fitting and funny that we finished this and got it out there, and then people saw a trailer, and then Microsoft must have been like, well, there's our controller, and there's an amazing looking game, and there's not much to argue with. It's just, if somebody comes to you when you're like a nothing, and they offer you to possibly be on Xbox One, it was kind of why, like, that's our initial go-to. We're like, definitely got to be Steam. Microsoft contacted us. It's got to be Xbox One. And I mean, like, open to the notion of putting it on any other platforms. But for now, since we're not a giant company, the idea is to get it done, get people playing it, and 2 platforms is plenty enough work for us right now.
Yeah, it might be all that you need. Of course, it would be great if everyone in the world could play it ever, and Unity does help with that, but PC and Xbox One, that covers multi-millions of people right there, so it would make sense if you might be a little bit tired of Cuphead come 2000, geez, what are we in, 14 now, it's coming out 15, porting would take you into 16 probably, so have you already thought about what kind of games you might want to do if Cuphead does well and you are going to stick through it? Any other genres? Any other types of games you might want to try?
Yeah, we've lightly touched on just when we get burned out on ideas with Cuphead, going back and forth and trying to refine things. We just throw ideas out at random, hoping they stick even in Cuphead or just in general to have a fun conversation. And I mean, there's been a few that stuck out quite well, but there's one that we don't really want to talk about. That's definitely, if Cuphead lets us go on further, we have another idea that we'll like to get out there.
Can you give me a hint about the genre?
Yes, Jared, you tell.
It's kind of a cross of an RPG and action platformer. Kind of. Like, the other thing is to be like, explain the game. It's not like we take the time. We haven't sat down and we're like, how would this be? How about how many characters? What's the plan on the level layout? We're too busy on trying to get Cuphead finished. But
Sure.
In general, it's weird that they both have like certain similarities. Maybe it comes from dropped Cuphead ideas, I guess.
Huh.
Like an idea of potentially having, instead of having the parry system, having a directional shield that would work effectively like a parry, but if you could aim it in 8 directions, then if you jumped on an attack, you could down parry or essentially like DuckTales pogo stick off of specific attacks. Like, these kind of ideas were floating, but they don't all suit what Cuphead's plan is. So we have like little ideas that we'll put together when we're done. So right now it's just like a random fantasy game, but it's not necessarily really anything yet. But there is the idea in our brains.
Huh. And what would you want to do with it in terms of scope that you may not be able to do with Cuphead? Cuphead comes across to me like a game that's got a realistic scope. It's going to be like level-based, very well-paced, every second counts, like a densely packed, enjoyable experience where, you know, the second-to-second, like, fun moment to second ratio is going to be through the roof. That's the feeling I get about it, which is the kind of game that suits me very well. Having a busy lifestyle, I want to be able to have 10 minutes and have 100 different fun moments in those 10 minutes if I can. But I imagine from the sounds of it, you might have ideas about how to do a more expansive world where it's not so much about stacking fun on people so tightly. Is that something you're thinking about?
Well, I mean, the thing is, since we're not designing that game right now, and I'm not going to say it's money, but I mean, it can only be as expansive as like our project goes. So if Cuphead barely sold, then like the next game's going to have to be at the exact same scope of like a Cuphead.
Sure.
You couldn't be like, we're hiring all the old retired Walt Disney animators and we're going to rent a studio and they will paint like Snow White backgrounds for our next game, unless you have the funding. There's no point in even daydreaming. So it'll be a little bit more of a universe. Like that would kind of be the idea of when we said RPG mixed with action platformer, kind of Ninja Gaiden-y vibe. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see if it that. Who knows? Like,
what I think independently made indie action platformer with RPG elements, I usually think of Cave Story first. I think about Cave Story all the time anyway, whether I want to or not. I just suddenly comes to my head. Is that the kind of... Have you played Cave Story? Do you like that?
It's not... Without getting into it, it wouldn't be such a Metroidvania type of design, like the same way of Castlevania Symphony of the Night or Cave Story. It would be a different approach.
Yes, different. Yeah, I think the different approach is something we'd rather show at that point than talk about it now, just because it might be a good enough idea that nobody's tried yet.
Right.
To like be
or it could be a failure that you'll never see ever.
Leaving that mystery and excitement about, is the idea going to work and what is it going to be? Very nicely done. Perfect. Very good. And I'd like you to, Chad, if you could, redraw all of Cave Story. Cave Story would look great in your style, just in your spare time.
Yeah, I think I'll do that. It's pretty. I have so much spare time as it is that I might as well put just a wee bit more in there.
Yeah, why not? So many questions came in. We started the show a little bit late. I apologize, everybody, for that. And right now, you guys are this quiet to me. So I've been like struggling so hard, but I think I've heard every word you've said. Thankfully, we have questions. People will come in, and I won't even have to hear what you're saying. I can just ask you questions, and I'm doing my job right. This is great.
Very nice.
Alex L. asks, what cartoons were the biggest inspirations for the game, if there were specific cartoons?
I think the specific cartoons, at least, that dictate kind of the flow of what we want for the zaniness and a bit of the creepier style are Swing You Sinners from Fleischer Studios and what's the other one? Oh, Bimbo's Initiation. They both have a very creepy, slightly comedic, but kind of almost scary theme. And we like that idea a bit better than the cleaned up. The later Disney stuff is cleaned up so families have fun watching it, and the earlier stuff, especially in the Fleischer Studios, they did a bit more adult without worrying about kids watching it so much. So
Right.
those definitely have the style that we're trying to portray and put in Cuphead.
So Cuphead's gonna creep me out sometimes.
That's what we're hoping with. For a lot of it, we want everything to seem a little bit natural, like the flower in the trailer. And then when you see an attack or you see something happen, it's just a little off. Something's a little weird with it.
Yeah. I love that kind of stuff. I went to the Epic Mickey Warren Spector talk, 2010 or so. He did a tour of Disney, and he talked about how much he loved that kind of stuff, just making people feel a little bit uncomfortable and using the fact that animation is by nature slightly unnatural. Like in animation, you can have an arm go like this, and it's like, well, it's just the world of animation. Don't worry about it, kids. But it is creepy to think about your arm suddenly having no bones and just wiggling around like jelly. He wanted to put as much stuff like that as he could in Epic Mickey, and I don't think he had the opportunity to. I wonder if he's played your game. He ought to, or at least seen it, because you're doing a lot of the things that he wishes he could have done from the sound of it.
But I mean, I think he did some of that stuff in Epic Mickey, put the little Steamboat Willie portion in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if their idea for the entire game would fit the flow if they tried to interject some of the zanier oddball stuff from the 30s. So I guess we get to pick that up and put it in our game. I mean, to answer the question further, all of the Silly Symphonies era from Disney is a huge inspiration for background art, quality of special effects that they did at that time, and even just the study of how they approached different designs on characters and, making everything come alive. And how did they make the acorn walk? Did they put 2 feet out the acorn, or did they split the acorn and his shoes were the outside of the shell and the nut was the guy? So just a bunch of, we've done way too much research and have way too many notes on what we can use for certain bosses or certain visual looks. So mainly Fleischer and a ton of Disney, which would be like the mainstay.
Gosh, that's exciting. This is what excites me. French Ed asks, I'm wondering about the HUD of Cuphead. Have you thought about the heads-up display? Is that what that stands for? I thought so.
Yes, and it's the reason why in the newest trailer you didn't see one. The first trailer we put up was kind of our quick test GUI, but we're working on it constantly because we're a little too picky. Has to be something that's not obtrusive because our bosses continually, well, for the most part, maybe not just the boss, but the effects and the movement of the bosses fills the screen. So if you have a very heavy user interface, then you're blocking a lot of areas where potential attacks or dodging could come into play.
Sure.
But we're trying to minimalize it and somehow keep it within the 30s design look, like the Art Deco style. So it's going to be, it's one of the harder things to design for the game because making the characters and the backgrounds come alive, there's a bunch of reference material that we can judge it against to see if it feels the same. But when it comes to the GUI, that sort of thing didn't exist in design or even advertising at the time. So it's kind of we'll have to make it up, and hopefully it looks perfect.
Yeah, that'll be easy.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy, but maybe I think we're probably at iteration 80 or 90 on the.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Wow, unbelievable. And maybe someone else will get to it, but before I forget, I don't know if I asked why Cuphead? Why a man? He seems to be a man with a head who is a cup. Why is that happening?
That happened from the desire to have a character that stood out. The rest of the 1930s and even into the next eras of cartoons always went with animals as the main characters or some form of human. And when we got into video game design, they kind of they kept that same cartoon rule where it's either an animal or a cool-looking human. So we kept playing with character designs, and one of the main, Jared reminded me this the other day, one of the main cartoons that sparked it was the China Shop from Disney. And it shows a bunch of fine china coming to life after the store owner closes up. And it was plates and spoons and forks, and there was, beer mugs and other things all coming to life with faces. And just as jokes, we're like, okay, why don't we just draw a character with a plate for the head and a cup and all of this stuff? And that's where it first started erupting from. And when we saw it and passed it around to our friends and peers, it's just the feedback we got. We knew that this is the character we're going to stick with.
Just felt right. It speaks to a time we talked about a little bit before where animation was new and they were so excited to see what they could do with it. It was like, this is before CG, this is before special effects really at all. So they're like, we can make a cup look like it's alive? That's amazing. Let's just do that. And that will be the entire premise of the cartoon. Like, cups are talking, guys. Watch that for 7 minutes, and then you'll be so happy. And they were, because they'd never seen anything like it. It's taking that excitement about potential, newfound potential, to jump into this world and just create that they had back then that maybe seems lost a lot of the time these days. And you guys are taking it and running with it. So just, yeah.
So I love the idea of throw a face on everything from that era.
Yeah.
You're just like, he's gonna open the door, and they're like, no, that's his nose, and he has to say one word. It's not a character. And then you're like, the clock has a face. Everything is basically alive because they could animate it.
Right.
And that's so wonderful.
I agree 100%. They did it because they could, and they didn't think about if it made any sense or what purpose there was. Though I can't help but feel like Cuphead is symbolic of having a mind that is open to getting filled with something and wanting to get out there and fill your brain with experience. That kind of naive excitement about getting out into the world and filling the cup brain. That's what I think about when I think about Cuphead. And it seems like that's the kind of stuff he's going to be doing. He seems like a sweetheart, a boy, not quite sure what the world's like, and running into this sometimes creepy, incredibly dangerous world and maintaining his naivete and just trying to survive while probably killing a lot of things too.
Yes. I mean, since part of the story is that he gambled his life with the devil to try to earn some money, just, the greed part of it too comes in, so it's kind of a little bit of a mischievous kind of, like early Bimbo, especially in Swing You Sinners, the opening scene shows him trying to steal a chicken, and it's that kind of an idea that, in our minds, forms what we wanted as our character.
But it doesn't sound like sadism. It sounds like that kind of childlike naivete and just wanting to meet the urge for self-interest without knowing what you're getting into.
Yes, and I think that's perfectly fitting.
Oh, yeah, I talk good, yeah. M Block BL asks, how is ID at Xbox working? And you talked a little bit about how flattering it was and how exciting it was to get the call from Microsoft in the first place, but the nuts and bolts of actually working with them, how has that been going?
Yes. For us, they are really open to different approaches for how they come to each developer, which I think is a bit unique compared to the way they did it in the past, following strict guidelines of this is how we deal with everybody. So they basically say, do you want us to be very hands-on or hands-off during the process? And, if there's times where we just want to crunch and get a bunch of work done, we can do that without, it's not set up in a way where there's tons of milestones to meet or anything crazy. It's just, it seems just like a trusting relationship of a very win-win. So there hasn't been any hiccups or problems, and I mean, it's been streamlined, so we have no problem at all.
Great to hear. It makes me think more and more that Microsoft is taking their role as curating what games they're going to support and push on their consoles very seriously. A lot of console developers just kind of let everybody on board or help certain people but not others, whereas with you, they really wanted what you had and they wanted to put it in the forefront of their image for E3 of this past year, because this is the kind of game they want to associate with their brand. And if people think this is what Xbox One is, part of it, You know, it's going to be Halo, it's going to be big third parties, and it's going to be Cuphead. Smart move, Microsoft. I'm happy with you for a change. Debbie Ever asks, did you have to learn 1930s style? And Debbie Ever is making an excellent game called Lillian Gish. Everyone should check it out. Makes me very happy. It's a cute little game about a rabbit woman who throws knives. Did you have to learn 1930s style animation, or was it something you already enjoyed doing? You've talked about that already, but to twist it a little bit, did you used to doodle 1930s style animation? Did you used to think, maybe I'll do this someday? Was it something you at least toyed with mentally, or was it something you just completely decided to run with the way you described before?
I've done Flash animation in the past, a little bit, and I've done some 3D animation, just dabbling in it for my own fun, and never actually really attempting to draw 30s era cartoons, mainly because I knew that's some of the most extreme talent in the world making those at the time. So to answer the question, no, I did not do any 30s beforehand, but I had to, when I was learning how to animate in my crash course that I took before doing it, Cuphead. And when I say crash course, I mean teaching myself. I read a lot of books and studied a lot and did a lot of animation tests just to see if I knew what I was doing for timing and spacing on all of the animation. And I actually had to unlearn a bunch of stuff that modern teachers give you as really good animation techniques, because they did none of those in the 30s. So I would say 40% of the time is studying frame by frame of certain segments of animation that we like, to see how they approached it, what they left out, what they put in just for their own unique style, and that kind of helped with this whole, let's make it look like it was made in the 30s.
You really had to dig in deep. It sounds like your appreciation was there most of your life, but to really go behind the curtain and see how these things are made, it for me anyway, doing animation in the past, it really changed how I could appreciate animation. Like, I can't just watch a cartoon even today and not notice, like, that squash and stretch could have been done a little better. Like, it can wreck it in a way. Have you found that that's been a problem for you? Are you so into this world of 1930s animation that you can't have the same taste for it anymore because it's like basically running through your bloodstream at all times?
Well, I think what really helps is all of the animators at the time were slightly crazy. So every cartoon you watch, there's always 2 or 3 things that come out of nowhere and blow your mind, even if the rest of it kind of followed the same structure of other 30s cartoons. So I'm never picking it apart and getting bored by it. But I think both Jared and I, our whole lives, and with some close cousins, we've always been picking apart games and animation and really studying it. That was for our own fun. So it feels natural. Like when you watch animation or play video games, to study aspects doesn't feel like it's ruining it for us, because we can still be immersed if the animation or the story is amazing, or in games if the gameplay is there.
Right. It's interesting. Last week we had Teddy Lee of Cellar Door Games. He works with his brother Kenny on Rogue Legacy, and they're saying so many similar things as you. There's something about this family bond and analyzing games and cartoons together and having it just be kind of the way you fully experience them as individual and with family, that can turn it into no longer work, because that's the main thing that you're doing that other people are not doing. Other people making Cuphead would feel like this is the hardest job they've ever had. And the way you describe it, even after all this work you put into it, there's still this kind of glow about it. It doesn't sound like work. It sounds like it feels like play for you to make this thing.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're just always have kind of had that mindset. And it's not just like me and my brother. It's also like we had a group of friends and some cousins, and we always had that, I don't know, critique. Like, it was always, you wanted to for some reason. Even when you were young and didn't know what you were saying, you'd be like, let's sit down and talk about, like, how Batman was and if Jack Nicholson's performance was spot on, and that could go on for like an hour and a half, and we've had some of the worst, like, it's too late at night, and the five of you are, like, discussing why you like or dislike Inception, and it just gets down to, like, nitpicking details, and to the point where it's just, like, it's amazing that we all lived in the same area, and that we always had this kind of group dynamic. And it kind of paid off in the long run, because now we seem to do it with ease. Like, he just picked up 30s cartoons. I'm not saying with, like, ultimate ease, but I'm still shocked that it went from, I'm not an animator, to being like, it looks like the 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. To have the ability to deeply analyze stuff and then reverse engineer the thinking that goes into that analysis and then create with it. Ugh, lucky bastards. Super Kitty Pogo Dance asks, do you ever get burnt out drawing the same characters repeatedly? If so, how do you work around something like that?
That's an easy one. I found out in the beginning that you do get burned out, because frame by frame, especially when you're filling in the animation after you've done the main drawing, key drawings, that you almost can't tell, and it feels like you're drawing the same picture. But I pencil test a lot. I just have a webcam hooked up, so it's very fast. I don't have to scan or anything. I can just put the pages down and quickly take a screen capture of them. And seeing the pencil test is enough to know, like, hey, you know, I can pencil test half the animation as I'm doing the fill-in and say this is looking perfect. And that is enough of a spark to make me finish the animation or tweak it or change it. Because, I mean, it's nice to think that animation works perfect, but sometimes you have to erase or start from scratch and redo it all and, you know, change some feet or some hands. But I think the idea that, it's hard to say, but if I was hired by a company and I was making a cartoon Cuphead and they said, here's the scene, here's the setup, I probably would be burned out. But since I know we're creating a game and like a ton of ideas are going into this, and this has been our dream since we were 6 years old, it keeps me going. It feels almost like infinite ambition to keep drawing, even if it seems very boring and tedious.
Well, that's the thing about play. Play reinvigorates itself. You get energy from doing it, which makes you do it some more, which makes you get more energy from doing it, and so forth. Unlike work, where if they don't give you money, you stop because you're like, this is terrible. So you found that. That's great. Before I forget, the other animator who I feel like shares a lot of thinking that you have, that you've expressed on this, is Mariel Cartwright, working on Skullgirls. I couldn't help but just want to beg for some sort of Skullgirls Cuphead crossover. I don't know if you've played Skullgirls. It's the only other game in the same tier of what you're doing that I can think of off the top of my head. That would just be perfect.
Yes, and I mean, we've had some other people mention that too, and we haven't talked to them yet, but, you know, there's always an option there in the future. Sure. We're kind of in our own bubble right now, and we have the ideas in our universe set. And I think for now we're going to stick with that, but we're not closed to the idea of things like this.
Or even just a Cuphead cameo in Skullgirls Encore, which is being worked on all the time. That could be neat. Any sort of little...
Oh, yeah, that would be amazing.
If you want to talk to them, let me know. I was just interviewing Mariel earlier today for Nintendo Force magazine, this other thing I work on. She's going to be featured in the next issue. She's very approachable and like one of the nicest people I've ever met, so that could be fun. Michael Riley asks, will the game be true to games like Contra in that if you die, you start over, or will there be save points, checkpoints, life bar, that sort of thing?
Well, we're going with a more modern approach. Like, it's not going to be from the beginning a 3-man, you die, you start fresh again. It's going to be a little more accessible, so you will have health and you will sort of save, like, imagine sort of like a Mario 4 or 3. Like, you have to achieve a little bit and then you don't have to do that part again. But that's on the basic mode. We will, in the end, hopefully, when you when you beat the game, we'll open New Game Plus. So then we want to like add a little bit more too. So like kind of that feeling of if you're the person who can get to the end of a bullet hell game and you're playing it on the hardest and you don't lose a man and then the last boss has one more pattern, it's like that kind of weird nuance and bonus that we want to add a little bit to when you replay it. You're not just replaying a slightly sped up version. And then that New Games Plus will be more classic. Like more, here's your 3 men, there's ways to earn free men, good luck beating it in one playthrough. But you won't be missing out on that much if you could only play the normal mode.
Right. So it sounds like the normal mode playthrough will inform you on the mechanics, the patterns, the bosses, but then the next mode will allow you to expand your abilities even further and give you more challenges to push you in directions that you didn't have the motivation to do before. You have to like basically get through as an expert, which I love, freaking love that. Mega Man X2, I forced myself, I somehow, as a kid, and when I say kid, I was probably like 17, I was kind of old, but I thought, I bet if I beat Mega Man X2 and not get any upgrades, like skip all of the armor, not get any of the heart tanks, not get any of the sub-tanks, something will happen. So I just did it, and I spent like a month working on that instead of homework, and I beat it and nothing happens.
You felt better inside, though, so that happened.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going to give me a mode that simulates that kind of feeling, which I'm ready to eat up again, for certain. Edgar Onokuga asks, and sorry if I butchered your name, Edgar, how long do you think bosses should be for action games? I'm designing a game now, and boss phases aside, I want to make the bosses that don't blow past in a few hits, but aren't damage sponges either. Yes, boss design. Such an interesting problem to solve. How do you make a boss that's just hard enough, hard in the right way? What kind of thinking goes into that?
Well, like, it all comes down to, let's say, you can put a little bit more health on a pattern that is easier to dodge because you need to introduce the player to what's happening on the screen. And then you can always add a little bit more, but let's just say, I'm keeping this short without a real example, but if you reach a final pattern of a boss, you can up the ante and the patterning and make it not impossible, but it can start to get really hectic. But you want that aspect to have lower health, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like unwrapping a puzzle and eventually getting to the point where but not making it so that puzzle is completely unaccessible at first. Last week, I keep talking about this for whatever reason, Teddy Lee of Celador Games making Rogue Legacy, he actually said he didn't want to make bosses that were wholly original at all because he felt like it was too unfair to the player to be given a whole new type of enemy to deal with who's also a boss who's really, really hard. So he based all of his bosses off basic enemies, so he had a general idea of how they attack and how to attack them back, just expanded upon it. But it sounds like you feel confident enough that you can make these bosses completely blow the player's mind at first, but in a way that's accessible and not too intimidating, so they just end up dead and wanting to give up.
But that's not going to be like the 100%. Like there's only, I'm not saying there's the minimal, but there's a certain amount of things that can be achieved. Like a spread shot and a P shot and a sine wave and a homing attack. Like a lot of the staples have been established, whether they have been put in a Contra game, it could have been like from a specific shmup, or it could have been something from some other platformer. But to say that every pattern was going to be 100% brand new, something that you haven't seen, would kind of be impossible to imagine. Like, if you're not dodging particles that move in some sort of way, then I don't even know what that boss is. If I come up with it, I'll put it as a secret. But we're definitely going to have just an interesting overlaying of how how old ideas are. Like, breathe fresh life. Like, make it different than something you've ever seen, even though it's involving patterns and ideas that you have played before.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, every now and again, come up with something that's like just outside the box enough that you feel like, I've never played a boss like that.
Right. So using the vocabulary people familiar with the genre know, but speaking something with it that's going to feel fresh and new. Huh. I love it. We're almost done, I think. Elias Games asked a question, and that is, how much downtime is there in Cuphead, and what's your preferred balance or imbalance between action and downtime? So yes, I couldn't help but guess that there's going to be some sort of end level or start level cutscenes or something along those lines. And I don't know if in the level there's going to be times when you don't have to worry about action for a little bit. Is that something you're pacing into it?
I think that's why we have our design led to a world map that you can explore. So think of something like Super Mario World, but instead of pushing left or right and watching him follow a set path, you can walk anywhere you want, like any action RPG or RPG world. And that puts a little bit of a break and a bit of a different spin on just going from action to action. And I don't want to say exploration because people are going to start saying, oh, it's cool that you can spend 3 hours on the world map. That's not what it's for.
Right.
But it's just to provide breaks, and there will be, end scenes after bosses and cutscenes to advance this minimal amount of story we'll have that break up that constant abuse. Because we're very sensitive to that. We know you can't just, as soon as you put a boss and keep trying to follow it with more and more, it tends to, you become numb to it. And then when you see another huge pattern, you think, wow, this has been happening, every minute for the last 10 minutes anyway, so there's no excitement. So
Right.
there's definitely...
On top of that, I'd just also like to put in having something like a world map, having the break is also not just so you're not fighting boss after boss, it also fleshes out the universe. Like being able to talk to a non-playable character, to be able to traverse a bit, to take your time and pick what order or what bosses or switch a weapon. It involving yourself in the universe breathes more life to when you're playing the game. Again, it's kind of like if you took Mario 3 and 4, it seems like there's a universe that you're in. You're a part of it. If you take Mario 1, it's still true, but it doesn't really feel the same.
Mm.
So that break does help that, and definitely reinstating on it's not going to be 10 hours of exploring. It's going to be a usable, functional map to help create the universe.
Right. Cleanse the palate a little bit, make you feel a sense of place, cause curiosity. My favorite thing about map screens is it gives my mind a little bit of time to be like, oh, I can't believe I survived that. Now what am I going to have to do? All there is like a box. I'm going to go in that box and God knows what's going to happen to me. And then suddenly you're in it. That kind of slight build-up anticipation, making the decision myself to actually press the button to choose. I'm thinking of Super Meat Boy now, which
Yes.
I absolutely love. And that was a game where I had to all right, I'm in, and press the button. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to stomach it. Wow, what a great game that is. What nice people they are, too. I don't know if you've met Tommy and Edmund, Team Meat. It would be fun to introduce you. I think you guys get along very well. Unless you've met them already.
No, we haven't met, but we've definitely been following them. And I think Jared mentioned this before, but that was definitely part of the spark. As soon as they started making Super Meat Boy and we realized it was just two guys starting to create this, that's kind of what kicked our ass to make our game. So we owe a little bit of thanks to them, too.
I'm going to, not to steal your thunder, but I'm going to tell Tommy you said so. I'm actually going to his wedding next month. It's going to be fun.
Wow.
I barely know him, but he's like, want to come to my wedding? I was like, of course I do. Stranger. We've met 5 times. But I love him. I love his games, and he apparently likes me fine. So lucky for me. I get to go to that. Well, I think it's almost time to wrap up the show, we're going late because we started late. Is there anything we missed? Anything else you guys wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I think we touched on almost everything, unless you had hidden questions that you just didn't want to pull out.
There might have been. No, I'm scrolling down, and I think that's everything. I know Austin Ibensmith, director of DuckTales Remastered, he was really excited about this episode. He wanted to ask a question, but I don't see it in the list. I think he wanted to ask, are you frustrated when people who kind of know about 1930s animation think that they fully know about it and ask you, like, oh, that's cool, it's so cool, it looks like the Amazing Fleischmann's cartoons, and you don't actually... I guess that happens to him because he worked on a beautifully 2D animated game for Way Forward, and a lot of people think they know what they're talking about when they talk to him about it, but they don't. Has that happened to you too?
It's happened, but I mean, we haven't had too many people who are arrogant saying, listen, I'm right and you're wrong. So if somebody doesn't know it perfectly and isn't spending 24 hours a day studying them, it's not like we're going to be offended or really care.
Right.
Why be bent out of shape just because everybody doesn't have the exact information about one topic? So if they feel like they got it, it's like, that's fine. We're doing our best. If that's your interpretation, that's fine.
Right. And then before I forget, is there going to be cutscenes and voice acting?
There will be cutscenes for sure, and we're iterating those all the time because the cutscenes need to be in the 30 style and convey what we want, but we don't want to do full motion animation because that's even more work than the game. So there's going to be a delicate balance of what we're going to do, and probably leaning towards a 30 style of Ninja Gaiden cutscenes.
Whoa.
So, and voice acting, yeah, we're both
Never.
Yeah,
Never.
Well, I would work for free. I have a nice microphone, and I can go into a studio, and my old man voice, it's world-renowned on the internet.
Well, there is that.
Oh,
That you might be in.
Anytime you want. I'll do it all day. It's a gift. It's the least I can do for Chad and Jared for making this video game for me to play. What you want. Give us a thought. I'm sorry, say again?
I'm writing that down.
Okay, good. Where can they find you on the internet?
They can follow us on Twitter at Studio MDHR, or our website, which we haven't updated recently because we're jerks, but we have more updates coming pretty soon, and that's at studiomdhr.com.
And what does Studio MDHR stand for?
Take a guess.
Yes.
Please use your puzzle-solving skills.
Take one or two guesses, and this is going to be amazing.
I couldn't help but think it was someone worked in human resources and a doctor. Like you knew a doctor of human resources, an MDHR. And I also always assume it's got to do with some sort of Chinese food additive that'll make me sick. Like,
those actually, I think,
restaurant that had MDHR in the food. Those are two guesses off the top of my head.
Combined, I think both of those actually are the answer because it's just a short form of our last name.
I should have figured it out. It's off my brain, guys. As for me, I'm at TronNuts on Twitter. The show can be caught on video form, rerun, on YouTube. This is, I believe, the 11th episode of the return after our Kickstarter. I think we have 89 more to go, so we're well into it, but there's a huge backlog. This is, I think, episode 111, so if you're feeling like getting to know what people who make video games are like, geez, we've got hours and hours of that for you if you want the backlog on YouTube, and also on iTunes and Libsyn. You can just listen to the show later in podcast form. Yes, find it, Holmes, Google it, and it'll pop up. I think that's about it for me. I think I did everything. How are you guys feeling?
No, I think you've covered everything.
You guys did an amazing job on the show. Thank you so much for talking to me and tolerating my technical problems and my verbal techniques and my overwrought tangents about Mega Man X2. I really I owe you one, to say the least. Thanks, guys. Take care.